Cara. Welcome back, everyone. We've had some inspiring and thought-provoking sessions already this morning. And I'd like you now to welcome Ewoud, who is founder and CEO of FeedbackFruits. And as the founder of a very successful and rapidly growing company, Ewoud brings a valuable perspective on how to develop trusted relationships in public-private partnerships. So Ewoud, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Jill, for this introduction. I'm excited to be talking here today because we're talking about standards. And what we know of is often interoperability standards. But I try to, just like the previous speaker, bring the view a bit broader and think about collaboration standards, and then especially collaboration standards in a public-private relation. So let's, I'll put my slides up, and if you can give me some cue whether or not you're able to see it, that would be fantastic. Do you see the trust framework slides at the moment?
That's looking good.
Thank you very much. Fantastic. Okay, so basically the trust framework, welcome and introduction. So my name is Ewoud, and indeed I'm founder and CEO of FeedbackFruits. That's an edtech company that is, of course, also a big LTI fan, and we use LTI a lot in the way that we work, and it's helped us grow internationally really well. But I'm not here as the founder of FeedbackFruits. I'm here as the founder of the Trust Framework, and we are a team of Dutch CIOs and some Dutch edtech companies that work together on this Trust Framework, and all do this at this stage as a bottom-up initiative, a coalition of the willing, as you may put it. And the core goal of our coalition is basically to make sure we can protect public values in the long term. Why? There was this report launched last week by the Dutch edtech Council. It's a council which basically advises the Ministry on education, and the Dutch Education Council. And they really clearly stated, like, what we have seen a digitalization of parts that are in the surrounding education, but what we will see the coming decade is digitalization of the core of education. And if that's going to happen, then we have to really be careful of basically protecting public values, because what you will find is that a lot of commercial companies will bring up solutions that are going to be in our core for public education. But how do we make sure that these commercial companies also hold the public values and not only shareholders' values in their operations? So that's basically the core goal. As Christine Bok, the previous speaker, already showed, is that in the Netherlands, they've been working on something they call the value compass. So it's basically these public values described of what does public education make education, what makes it so important. Think about autonomy, justice, and humanity. This is a fantastic start and a framework that we have used to start iterating on. Well, so we came together, I think, a year ago, and where we, again, a bottom-up initiative, where we said, okay, so we know digitization of education is going to be an element. We also know that there is a shareholders' value interest in this basically transition. How do we make sure that we can protect these public values in this collaboration? So our thinking was as follows: like, we need two sides. One side, we need to make sure that startup and scale-up companies and edtech companies realize what are these public values, and how can I, as a company, contribute to these public values? Because what we see often is a certain basically development. So you have this startup or this scale-up that is started by a founder that's often very passionate about a problem that they want to solve, and then they become successful, as in they get traction on their product. Often they'll get an investor on board, and then all of a sudden, already a little, the value perspective is going to change. It's not only about solving the problem, but it's also about making money in solving that problem. And then they continue to grow and be successful. And all of a sudden, the founder is not there anymore. And there is this more, if I may put it this way, private equity look at an edtech company, right? It's the same type of look as you would look at a fintech company or any other tech company with a clear shareholders value maximization perspective in mind. So the logic and the reasoning was, if at the beginning, when the founders are still on the helm and the company is still small and still wants to challenge the status quo, we are really clear to these companies on this is, you're going to operate in public education. It means that you need to make sure you protect these standards, basically. So when a company is small, they're still hungry, but also their architecture, so their business model architecture and their technical architecture is still very fluent. Basically try to influence them to build the foundation such that if that company is really big, it actually contributes in the right way. So that's on one hand, basically inspiring edtech companies, and often in the startup and scale-up phase, to design their principles such that they align with public values, one hand. Other hand, it's basically drafting agreements that institutions can use when tendering or when making agreements with edtech companies, such that these public values can be legally protected. So those are basically the two foundational cores of the trust framework. And this was and diving into scale-ups and startup was basically the start. And before I go to continue my explanation, the reason that we did this, the reason that we found this inspiration, is FeedbackFruits has been founded in 2012 when I was still a student. And in 2013, we wanted to connect to Serve Connects. That's basically the national authentication system for higher education. And we had to apply basically to very high privacy and security standards for those days, 2013. A lot has changed in the meantime, but if you go back to those days, privacy and security wasn't of personal data wasn't such a big thing as it is today. But we were still small. We had to we had to make sure we were matching these standards. So we just drafted our privacy and security standards around these standards that we were given when we were still small. Then we grew up as a company, and then GDPR came. For us, that was fantastic because we already complied, because we had to basically do this already in 2013. So for us, there wasn't a lot of adjustments to be able to comply with these new regulations. Then we started to internationalize and go outside of Europe. And at all institutions that we worked with, it was like, oh, privacy security, you're from Europe, so that is okay. So all of a sudden, we saw that basically it helped us a lot in doing business. And we foresee that this can happen outside only just privacy and security, but more elements involved. Okay, so that's basically the reason that experience has brought us to actually start this. So as I said, the framework consists of two elements. That's a charter element, which is really more rule-based, and there is this framework element, which is more principle-based to the framework. I'm not going to dive too much into the framework today, but if you go trustframework.io, you will find the first version. So we have a 0.1 version. Realize we're now working on our 0.2 version. It's an open source initiative. It's fail forward style, trying to get as quick as possible from these high over values to low deployable principles that edtech founders can understand, and also basically lawyers can understand, that can land in either an architecture for edtech founders or into their agreements. So how did we generate these sort of overall these deployable principles, right? So we started with the public values and more European values, to be honest. One of the founding members of the trust framework is a lawyer who also writes on the data, European data chart, the data agreements at the moment. So he really has that European perspective in mind. So we try to make sure it lends into that European legal context, but it's extremely pragmatic, because that's what founders need. So we used a couple of perspectives basically to generate these principles. One is the perspective, okay, so if we talk about public-private collaboration, where did it go wrong in the past? The other is, where did it go right right? What are good examples? Of course, also hack the system by, between brackets, the evil capitalist. I'm not want to say that all private equity companies or all edtech companies are necessarily evil, but what if we would be dealing with a private company that's really only purely interested in shareholders value, and we take that sort of the worst case scenario, we try to think this through, what public values can be herded in the long term, and how can we protect that upfront? So that's basically the view that we took. And just to make it a bit more concrete, where did it go wrong in the past, right? So we did a lot of interviews and discussions with people, and there are a lot of elements of basically examples of where it went wrong in the past. Here are a few. So there was this edtech company that was heavily financed, working according to a land and expand approach, which meant we basically hand out the technology for free, and then hopefully later we'll find a way for a business model. Then the end of their runway, basically their money was there, so they had to find a way to make money. So they had basically gave institutions which widely adopted this technology using LTI integrated into the learning management systems. And they basically approached these institutions and said, you either are going to pay a significant amount of money now for something that used to be free, or we're going to advertise your students. And because advertising wasn't personal advertising, it didn't violate GDPR regulations, so they could do this. This is something where I think we should make sure that in the future this doesn't happen anymore. One more thing, there was this video streaming service that blocked certain students because they were discussing a terrorism project group assignment, and they were blocked, and they basically were excluded from their education, and it took a lot of time to get them back. This was, of course, AI that was meant to was designed with a whole different perspective in mind, so it all happened automated. But for these students, it gave, well, basically their access to education was literally blocked at that moment. These are things that I think if we design edtech, we should think these things through. We should make sure that doesn't work anymore. Or if we apply other technology as edtech, right? Because that's also often the case. A third experience is, for example, technology. What you find is in this early stage, technology is really quickly innovating, right? And iterating, up until a point in where R&D is seen as a cost center. This actually goes aligned with the trajectory that I just mentioned. So first there's a founder, then there's often a VC, and then you have private equity. In the private equity scenario, often R&D is really referred to as a cost center, and it's often basically reduced. So you see the technology not innovating anymore. This is, I think, a problem, especially if we talk about the core of education and where we are talking about a digitalization transition, and where we have to make sure the technology is continuously evolving with basically the needs from and the new insights that we generate. And well, often you find that sort of playbook in where during renewals, all of a sudden technology becomes significantly more technology where there's not a lot of free choice anymore, right? So there are a couple of players that becomes much more expensive all of a sudden for the same type of technology. This is, well, these are the key experiences that we try to protect. So how does that then work? Well, we have that collaborative trust framework, which is a framework that works with these key values and works them out in deployable principles. So just to give you an example, deployable principle 5, well, that's a relatively straightforward deployable principle. It talks about edtech, your educational technology. You're not advertising technology, not edtech, right? So this is the deployable principle. It's worked out in it's more detailedly worked out such that founders can use this to actually design their business model on one hand, but on the other hand, we can actually assign agreements in where edtech companies are forced to only use the existing business model and not try to use other additional business models to it. Another example is freedom of education, which is really important, right? If you see the digitization of education, you'll find that teachers will be forced to start using certain pedagogies more, or basically they might there might be a risk that they lose their freedom of how they educate, and I think that that's something that an education company should always avoid. So they should always allow instructors, teachers, as well as institutions to take their own pedagogical or content approach towards learning. Usefulness by design is, I think, a really interesting one. Tech, right? So traditional technology is often designed for as much engagement as possible, right? The attention economy on Netflix, if you've seen that series, it really talks about how we advertising. If you have advertising as a business model, then you want your users to be as much online as possible. So in the tech industry, sort of this thing, everyone is obsessed with as much usage as possible. But I think when it comes to education, we should realize that if you introduce technology, you take away attention from another part of the educational process. So it should always be in balance. And so we should design technology not for maximum usage, but technology should be designed to make sure the experience is very useful by students. And then the last, and I think that that's where I have to round off, is responsibility to innovate, right? So if we think about the way that we basically financially incentivize edtech companies to work, that's through licenses. But if you see that licenses business model, it's basically a profit margin of 90% or 80%, right? So it's 80% shareholders value and 20% the cost of goods sold. So basically they're running the services and doing your support. But that basically means the incentive is to sell as much license as possible. If we would adjust it a little or somehow and actually start paying for innovation, then you can also somehow assure the responsibility to continue to innovate. These are just a view for a bottom-up initiative that tries to give hands and feet toward protecting public values in a public and private collaboration. Stay up to date through the website. Thank you very much for listening. And Jill, back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ewoud. Again, I can see people applauding. Great to have a supplier perspective on this. We've just run over time, so in order to give people a break, we have a 15-minute break, and then Ewoud and Christine will be joining some of the guests for a panel discussion about these topics. So please take the opportunity to have a break and come back ready to join the discussion on the hour. Thank you all.